Thanks, Marjorie. Really
You're
good to be
welcome.
here, and thank you to all of our guests. We've had a chance to spend a little time together and get to rebuild, or in some cases expand on our relationships with each other. So it's really wonderful to have four distinguished graduates of AAP, specifically graduates from the architecture program, with us today. We're joined by Imani Day, and she's a licensed architect with Gensler in the Detroit office. And she's also a former adjunct professor of design at the University of Detroit Mercy and an editorial fellow with Columbia University's Avery Review. After graduating from Cornell University with a Bachelor of Architecture in 2011, she spent her early career in New York City, working for Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, as well as Robert A.M. Stern. In 2015, Imani moved to Detroit to focus more on community-oriented design projects throughout the city, where she has a strong passion for educational spaces as well as cultural work. She also has served as an executive board member for the local chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, which she'll share a little bit of her insights and her work today. Our second panelist is Christopher Morse. And Chris is currently a lead developer of interactive visualization at Sharp Architects in Lower Manhattan. He focuses on research and development to integrate XR technologies into all phases of the building design process. His work includes large-scale virtual reality walkthroughs, real-time connections between interactive visualizations and CAD software, as well as tools to assist architects to analyze, evaluate, and communicate design decisions. He was a visiting lecturer at Cornell, where he has taught courses surrounding the use of AR and VR in both studio as well as in visual representation. And is also previously a researcher at the program of computer graphics at Cornell. Welcome, Chris. He also has, should point out, Chris has an unusual background because he also has a math education from Teachers College at Columbia, and also a BA in physics from Northwestern University. So computer technology is something he's quite comfortable with. We're also joined by Josh D'Souza. Josh is the co-founder of Hu D'Souza, a New York-based architecture and design office. He's received his Bachelor of Architecture from Cornell in '05, and he has also worked on a variety of cultural and institutional projects while working at the offices of OMA, SOM, and Joel Sanders Architect, all in New York. He teaches at the Parsons School of Design and frequently serves as a guest critic, certainly at Cornell, but also at MassArt and at Syracuse. And he's also lectured with the Architectural League of New York and also at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. Josh, good to have you here, and wish we could get Nancy. She's probably in the other room.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. And our fourth guest is Andre Gimmond. And Andre is the director and co-founder. His original firm that he developed is called Present Architecture. That firm has recently been amended, and he now has a firm named after himself. His office specializes in creative, innovative architecture that responds to global challenges confronting urban as well as natural environments. And his original firm he established in 2012, and more recently he's relaunched his firm. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Cornell and a Master of Architecture from the University of Tokyo, where he did research with the Japanese Ministry of Education and Science, and also worked with the distinguished Japanese architect Toyo Ito and Associates, where he worked as a lead designer on a variety of architectural projects located in the United States, Europe, as well as in Asia. He's also a New York State licensed architect and is currently in Maine, where he's also a licensed architect. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to shift over. We have a couple of questions to build off of the idea of communications, and we thought we should start really kind of at the point of departure, which was really your time leaving Cornell and how you actually navigated into those first career opportunities. So the question I have for each of you, and we'll start with Imani, and then Chris, and then to Josh, and then to Andre, The question I have for you is, what are some of the unique skills and talents you leveraged when seeking opportunities after graduating from Cornell? And if you have any themes on communications, please feel free to expound on maybe how you use that as part of our theme today. Thanks, Imani.
Sure, yeah. So I'll just start by saying on campus, I did work in the Career Services Center long ago, so in like 2008 and 2009. So it was a little different then, but I had a bit of training in editing resumes for other students, editing cover letters, looking at portfolios and those sorts of things. So I had a lot of, I think I could see a lot of other students' work and resumes, so I could really build my own, and I took a lot of time to make sure that mine was pretty tight. So I'd say one thing that's important is use the free time that you have right now to get those things as tight as possible. Recently, I've seen like some typos in resumes or like silly things that really throw people off sometimes or make them not really trust that you can edit your own work and yourself. So I would just use that time to, you know, dot the I's, cross the T's, all of those things. But for me, when I was in school, I started reaching out to people who I found inspiring for one reason or another. And I'd say a lot of those people did not respond. Okay, so it's not like everybody I reached out to was just perfect, but one person in particular, Kim Dowdell, who is now she graduated in 2006 and is now the president of the National Organization of Minority Architects. I reached out to her in 2008 or 9, and we're still very closely connected, and I've really used her as a mentor and a sort of guiding light for some of the career decisions that I've made. But she ended up making a lot of other new connections through NOMA and Cornell for me, which helped later down the line when I got to Detroit. But my first job out of school was Robert A.M. Stern. And so it was actually my first application and my first interview. And usually people say that is like just the trial run and you won't get that job. Like, that's not a trial run, you could get that job. So that job really came out of me reaching out to Cornellians. So there are a couple principals there who are, or partners they're called there, who are Cornellians. And it actually ended up, there were a couple students who had just graduated as well who I reached out to say, hey, I see there's an opening, or hey, how do you like working there? And actually at the time, I did a bit of research to make sure that it was going to be something that would fit me well. I mean, when you're coming out of school, you don't always have that luxury. But I knew their projects and I knew kind of in some ways what I needed to learn how to do. I knew that at the time my CAD skills and my building Revit skills and Rhino skills would be applicable there, and that generally just commercial residential architecture was like a direction that I wanted to head in. And obviously Robert Stern is like the father of OMO, and so it felt like an easier kind of way to learn some of those skills. So you should really look, like if you think you want to do innovative architecture right out of the gate and like experimental architecture with structures you've never seen before, that's great, but it's very difficult to learn just like a rhythm of how things actually work when you're scrambling to figure out everything else at the same time. So these buildings and designs are pretty straightforward. I don't want to, that's not a knock to their design, but it is a little bit more regimented. So it was really, really helpful to learn how to build models and how to draw and really get like a sense of my own design foundation there. And then moving from Robert Stern to Diller Scofidio, there was another Cornell connection where I interviewed with David Allen. He's, I think, in the senior ranks there. I don't think he's a partner, but he and I, in that interview, really had a lot to talk about just based on professors that we had that were the same or experiences that we had that were the same. And then I think we protect our own and we kind of, you know, push our, like if I talk to any of you in an interview or you reach out to me and say, hey, I really love Gensler or something, I would be like, this is a Cornellian, I really want to help this person out. And so a lot of times it was me just kind of either using or talking to a fellow classmate and saying, hey, do you know anything about this firm? You've worked there? Can you connect me to someone who can help? Because cold calls for interviews and just sending a portfolio is so rarely so rarely the best way to go about doing things. I'd say at Gensler, my experience has been if you don't have a referral from someone who works there, we don't even really open a lot of those applications. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like the referral is what gets you the interview. And without that, you have to be wildly exemplary, which I'm sure a lot of you are, but you may not even get noticed if you don't have someone advocating for you inside. And even Gensler, obviously Art Gensler is a Cornellian, but that job really came through a lot of NOMA connections. So NOMA and Cornell really and even the Cornellians within NOMA, which are Kim Dowdell, Antoine Bryant, Lisa Chumley. There's a lot of Cornellians and networks within networks that you can really leverage, because I can text Kim, I can text Antoine and say, who do you know, help me out. And really that's a large portion of how I got to Detroit, how I got to Gensler Detroit, and just solidifying that network and continuing to build those relationships has always been super, super helpful to me. So I'd say if you're reaching out, know who you're reaching out to, because I do get people reaching out to me and it's kind of a generic, like, hey, I went to Cornell, whatever. But really it's like, hey, I know who you are, Imani. I care to talk to you because X. I'm really interested in X. Can you help me with Y? And so just building that ability to even just like, you have to do a little bit of legwork and a little research just to get through to them, so they feel like, oh, there's some personal connection here. Yeah. Really, really helps. So I'd say all throughout my career there's a Cornellian somewhere in there helping me out. So I'd stick to your network and know that there's a lot of value in it.
That's great. That's great. Imani, thank you. A lot of good content in there. Chris, let me put it over to you. There you go.
Yeah, I'm just going to start by agreeing with especially that last thing that Imani said. I'm interested in X. Can you help me with Y? I've had a number of people reach out to me. I'm not. Let me just backtrack. I graduated in 2016, so I'm still, I'm the newest of the graduates of this alumni panel. I'm not in a position at SHOP to give out jobs. But people will email me and say, hey, is there any opening? And I want to help, but it's hard to help if it's just sort of a generic, hey, I'm looking for a job. Whereas if you say, I'm really interested in this particular thing, or I saw this project that SHOP did that was really cool, if I have something that I can latch onto, I can then go to somebody else at SHOP and say, okay, I just got this email from a student who's interested in this, maybe I can connect you to them. So having something specific that you're looking for, or something specific, really helps me help you sort of find those connections within the office. So I think that's really important. So to go back to my own experience, after I graduated, I spent some time doing research at the program of computer graphics, and I found that to be a very helpful sort of buffer time between graduation and actually getting a full-time job. The job search is hard. It takes a lot of time. And in school, I didn't feel like I had the time to devote to looking for a full-time job and also finishing thesis. And so and it's not always possible for everybody, but if you have a temporary position that you can do for a few months after graduating, and really use that time to spend more in depth looking at full-time jobs and opportunities, I think that was very helpful for me. So for me, I sort of focused specifically on computational design, more specifically virtual reality, but looking for opportunities not just in architecture, but also next to architecture or adjacent to architecture. There's a lot of skills that you develop as an architecture student that are transferable to a lot of different fields. Other fields may not recognize that to the same extent that we know is to be true, but there's a lot of opportunity sort of next to architecture. So if you're looking for opportunities, try to broaden it a little bit and look outside.
Yeah. So, and Chris, I was going to say, as it relates to the current economy, I would imagine things are still somewhat unique in the AR, VR world, given how much interest there is in that technology and that platform. Is that an area that these students might want to consider looking at if they have that aptitude and interest?
I mean, absolutely. you're asking a very biased person. I'm sure that the field is going to get bigger. And I'm very excited about it. It's a sort of an interesting, like whenever you have a specific niche, there's the sort of the two different aspects of that where not every firm is looking to hire a full-time person doing VR. So it maybe reduces the number of places that are interested in hiring, but at the same time, there's not very many other people that do it. So the firms that are looking for it, there's fewer candidates or fewer people applying. So it can both reduce the sort of the supply, but increase the demand, or vice versa. But that's why I say sort of, broaden outside of architecture, because if you have that skill, in my case, virtual reality, it applies to not just architects. So I was looking at a lot of different types of firms that were doing that. And also with the understanding that sort of your first job is important, but it's also not your final job. So it's okay to sort of test the waters and explore something. And then, after a certain amount of time, reevaluate and say, okay, no, this wasn't for me, and then go look for something else. Along those lines, I'll also mention that I used to be a teacher, and so I'm aware of sort of the job shift, the career change. It can be challenging and a little frightening. So that idea of, okay, I had this one job for a while and then deciding I don't like it and moving on, it can be intimidating. You kind of feel like, well, I spent all this time doing this one thing. How can I do something different? But it's definitely doable. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Josh, let's pass it over to you.
Sure. It was a while back now. I graduated in 2005. And at the time, I had been TAing. I'd been a teacher's assistant a couple times for 3D modeling courses at Cornell while I was there. And that opened up a summer job teaching an interesting class. It was architecture design for children. So everybody was under 10 years old. It was, I don't know if Cornell still has this program, but I think that was like a really helpful thing at the time, to continue having avenues of teaching while preparing the portfolio and getting ready to make a transition between Ithaca and, the first real professional job outside of internships. Which I had done in New York previously at a large corporate office at SOM. And I knew eventually, I didn't know quite a bit, but I knew that I was interested in starting my own thing at some point down the road. I didn't know how quickly it would come. So I wanted to gain some experience with small offices. So I'd have like a more hands-on involvement than I was getting, say, at the large corporate office with the first job, first internship sort of thing, which is valuable as well. But I was helping out at a place called Jordan Parnas Digital Architecture in Brooklyn. And it was pretty chaotic. They were doing a bunch of retail shops around the US for a company that's kind of came and went in a flash, American Apparel. So they were opening 3 or 4 shops a month in different parts of the country, and there was this team of 6 or 7 people that was like in charge of all of this, and it was just like super rapid pace and competitions and stuff. So that was like kind of trial by fire, or baptism by fire, getting like a lot of experience really quickly, which was good. But then I moved on to another small office that was even smaller. And it was this one guy, Simone Giostra, an Italian guy who was working on a project in Beijing. And that was great because it was really focused on this one larger project, working with one other person. And it was like a totally different experience. And I realized, basically any small office is going to be unique, and you're going to get really hands-on experience. And I think that was useful at that time, to just have that transition from my mindset in school was very theory heavy and just completely absorbed in the concepts of everything and the design of everything, and to just begin to absorb like all this pragmatic stuff related to practice was just really useful for me at the time. So I think right now, casting a wide net and being open to like a bunch of different opportunities, definitely super important. There, in some cases, a small office might be that, or a large office. It might not be what you were hoping for, but I think it makes sense to keep a lot of things just open, given the current circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. Andre, let me pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I also have been out of school for a while now. I overlapped with Josh. I graduated in 2003. So it's actually been fun the last couple of days thinking back to those days. It's funny how you move on in life, and just kind of, you know, focus on the future and the present. Let's see. So I had graduated kind of at the tail end of the .com bust or recession, which I wouldn't say is as bad as the situation right now, but it was still a difficult time to find a job. There was definitely a bunch of students in my grade who were super organized and had jobs waiting for them at these big firms like SOM and Gensler, you know, June 1st or whatever, when they graduated. And I was not that organized, maybe a little bit jealous, but not that organized. And I think in retrospect, like maybe Josh was saying, it was good to have a little time to just catch my breath after thesis. I ended up staying in Ithaca for a few months. I had been TAing for Marc Cruvelier, doing structures TA work. So I ended up spending the summer doing part-time work on a website for him. And that allowed me to begin the process of like finishing my portfolio, finishing my thesis book, looking for a job. And let's see, I think, you know, in retrospect, of course, I was quite young, and I knew, like Josh, that down the road I wanted to start my own thing, and I knew that I needed some experience at smaller firms, I think. But I also allowed myself a few years to get there. I was like, well, that's not going to happen until I'm like 27, 28, you know, which was ambitious anyway in retrospect. So I just kind of like gave myself a little bit of breathing room to learn about the profession and kind of find my path. And so so I've done a Cornell summer studio in Japan. Well, it must have been 2 years prior to that. And I just loved Japan and was very interested in Japan and China at the time. And so simultaneous to beginning to look for a job after I graduated, I also began applying for opportunities specifically in Japan to head back there. What ended up happening was that ended up being a 9-month process that came through for me in March of the following year or April of the following year. And I didn't know whether or not I'd get it. It was pretty difficult scholarship. It was kind of like a full ride. They pay for your housing, they pay for your school, that type of thing through the Ministry of Education. So I kind of wasn't banking on it. And I think the reason why I'm saying this is because what I ended up doing was making sure that I had multiple things, you know, on the front burner. So I was looking for a job, I was networking, I was applying for this scholarship. And I think that like those lessons are important today too, in a very difficult job climate. Like, what is there more than simply like a job in New York City that would interest you, you know, and maybe you need to begin that process now because it can take a long time to come through for you. And so anyway, in the meantime, while I was working on that scholarship, I began reaching out to kind of smaller firms in New York. I was a little bit less interested in the large corporate firms, although like in retrospect, I think either one of them would have been really helpful because there's just so much to learn. I'm still learning every day. It's just like an incredibly complex profession to really be an expert, to really know what you're talking about. And just to keep the water out of a building is just incredibly difficult. So in any case, I was applying to a lot of the kind of cool young firms there, not really getting through to people, didn't have a huge network. But what I did have was a good relationship with David Lewis of LTL. And initially he didn't have work, but then he got back in touch with me, you know, mid to late fall. And they had gotten a couple new projects. And so he brought me into their office, where I stayed for a while until I ended up going to Japan about 6 months later. Yeah, and so just like to finish up quickly, I think it can be a little bit overwhelming. And I think your mindset really needs to be at this point, if you don't have a job, remember that you actually do have a job and is looking for a job. And And this is really the first time in your life when there's no like professor looking over your shoulder, your parents aren't nagging you, you're completely on your own. And you just have to get up in the morning, like at 9 a.m. you should be sitting at your computer thinking about who can I build, who can I bring into my network? Who can I email? Who can I potentially call? Although I don't know if that's the best strategy. What interests me. And you really need to give your best hours of the day to this process. And the only person that's going to hold you responsible is you. And so that's why I say you already have a job. Now your job is to look for another job, and really be diligent about it and patient with the process.
Yeah. So true. Thank you, Andre. I think there's so many points that all of you have made about the kind of challenges associated with those that are out there in the marketplace right now trying to find their way, because it does take a huge amount of effort. And like you say, Andre, it's like a full-time job to get to the job that you really want. And it does require a lot of research and understanding of how to do it and how to do it well so that you don't come off as impersonal or unaware of what the obvious things are that might be on their website. Certainly one of the things that you can really embarrass yourself is going in and asking questions that are so obvious that you've not done your homework that you pretty much blow the opportunity to even go any further, whether that be an interview or even just baseline communication. So my next question to the group really is addressed to those current students that are kind of thinking about graduation in say 2021, as well as some of the ones that just graduated, thinking about what are some of the proactive steps that you would recommend today as it relates to your job search or preparing for graduation next spring. And the specific question really thinks about how students should start to think about expanding their network, for lack of a better word. It's a little bit overused, but I know some students are really quite proficient at developing their own websites or using Instagram or being able to use LinkedIn as a way to start to really do a more directed research effort. So I was just curious if each of you would comment on kind of putting yourself in the student's position or as a recent graduate, kind of what you would be doing right now if you were kind of faced with the current challenge of a COVID-19 market. So I'll pass it back to Imani.
Yeah, so I guess I would say a couple of different things. I have looked into building websites. I'm not the best Instagram user, and I don't know if you have to push yourself into being like a social media influencer or something at a time like this. But what I would say is those are really easy ways to just showcase like little sketches here and there. It doesn't always have to be a super polished thing. Also, it doesn't always have to be very architecture proper. So what I've learned through my editorial fellowship and just some writing that I've done is that you can actually make quite a bit of money just writing. And you can, if you have a point of view on sustainability, inclusion and equity, as a student right now, there's a ton of value in your perspective, whatever it may be. And so think about other avenues. Like you don't have to just be gunning for a job where you're sitting in front of a computer designing spaces all day very specifically. And, like it's not always architecture, like buildings or urban planning specifically. Like there's so many other ways. I've seen people start doing research for professors. I've seen, again, just writing, because I think we had for the editorial fellowship, and I'm sure that every school has some version of this publication, but we had an essay contest where you could win like $4,000 if you just win the contest, right? Or if you're reaching out again to your networks to say, hey, I have something to say, but I don't know exactly how to get into this publication. You can get $500 or hundreds of dollars to write about something you kind of already know, or to just do a little bit of research and help somebody out. So start thinking about like in between a couple of jobs, I've done like some logos for people, and those are quick sketches. It takes about, it could take iterations and iterations and iterations of design, but in between you can showcase that work and then you get more work. So I just did, like my friend just started a law firm, which, make friends outside of architecture because that helps. She's a Cornellian too. She started a law firm, and she needed to revamp her website. She said, I need a little bit of graphic help. And we do that when we put our presentations together for every review. So if you just think about it and look up some UI, like user interface, user experience stuff, you have the tools to be a graphic designer in some capacity. That's a whole different thing, but you can use your graphic design skills that you have now and make a couple grand off just some branding. So don't limit yourself to I have to build a building or a house right now, because like nobody has money to do that right now anyway. But people do have money to get their own businesses off the ground. So look at some other ways to just stay engaged and actually just be a little bit more well-rounded in your thinking and in your production of things.
Great, thanks. Chris, let me throw it over to you.
Yeah, so for me, well, one of the things that I want to sort of point out, I think everybody here finds connections, through their network, through people they know. That's a very common way to get positions, but it's easy for us to look back and remember the one that got us a job. But for every one connection you have that gets you a job, there's 20 more that you reached out to that didn't go anywhere. So keep that in mind, that we're talking about these moments that we remember, but there's a lot that goes on next to that or behind that we don't talk about because they didn't end up going anywhere, and that's sort of necessary. So for me, I actually, I got my job through Shop, through initially reaching out with regards to my thesis. So a year before I graduated, I had reached out through the Cornell network. Hey, is anybody at an office doing work in virtual reality? I'm doing my thesis in virtual reality. I'm looking just for advice, looking for, see what people are doing. And so I got a connection to Shop through that outreach. And then a year later, I reached out again. I kept in contact with the contact at Shop. I had finished my thesis. I had worked a little bit. I'm now looking for a job. I have that connection. And so the point there is that it's not too early to sort of express interest, or, if there are things and sometimes you don't know what you want. That's very common that you're not sure, but sometimes you do know that you're interested in something, and you can express interest a year ahead of time is fine. The other story along with that is that I am also teaching at Cornell currently, the visiting lecturer, and that was something that I've always been interested in, maintaining a connection to academia and teaching part-time. And so I had reached out, hey, I'm interested in this. Is anything available? And when I reached out, nothing was available. A year later, something was available. And so expressing interest, letting people know, and creating those connections ahead of time can go a long way. And just to go back to the thesis one of the things that I like about that is that when you reach out to Cornell alum at a firm, for the most part, they want to help you. Especially right now, they may not be able to help you with a job, but if you can ask something like, I'm looking for advice on this project, that it's something that they can do that will be helpful to you. And so that can help you create a connection that you can then maintain and develop and use later. So it sort of goes back to that line of being specific and asking for help, and letting them help you with something to create that connection, I think can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristen, you make a really great point about the idea of thinking more long-term, not so transactional, but actually thinking about the fact that just in the world of architecture, it's actually a fairly small network of people. And to think long-term is to be able to think about the life of what it takes to become a really successful architect. Takes years. As Andre mentioned, there's so much complexity, but it's important to understand that people move around, and where you might have met someone at one firm, there may be, you find them at another firm later on. But that network and that willingness to think about that kind of long-term conversation of getting to know people, getting to know about firms and what they're really good at, I think really does change our attitude about how these relationships form and how they can be quite accidental and other opportunities happen in your life. So I think you're so well put about the idea of thinking about this in a much more kind of elongated version, which I think is very much what I've seen in the practice when I was at Gensler. These relationships would go on 10, 20, 30 years where people would keep, getting to know each other and building off of those relationships. But let me throw it over to Josh.
Yeah, so a year or two, like prior to being ready to graduate, I guess you would find yourself in the unique position that you've built a certain number of skills to a certain degree, and I think at that point you're beginning to become aware, or you should be asking yourself, what are the things I'm enjoying most about this, and it's almost always intimately linked to the thing that you're excelling at, and what areas could use improvement related to those things that you're really enjoying. And that's going to be a kind of perhaps a helpful stepping stone for your, beginning the thesis process and all of that, because you're going to be investing a lot of time in that research and investigation. And I think the other big one is just to go back to the skills, like Imani was mentioning with website building, whatever it is that there's like, identify like that thing that you kind of broadly speaking, architects, we deal with like a lot of different things. That's one of the amazing things about the profession. You can kind of never get bored with it. There's always there's this huge vast collection of stuff that's always going on, all these different interrelated disciplines. But there are some, like, everybody gravitates towards like a few of them at least, and like becoming an expert at any of those is always going to be really useful, particularly when it comes to the time of getting those first internships or the first jobs out. Because when we're looking at portfolios, it's rare you're going to just get some portfolio that it's like, this person has it all out of school. Like, they know how to design, and they have amazing like drawings, and they're the best communicators, and their letter is perfect. And like, there aren't, I mean, maybe once in a while, but rarely ever happens. But like, I think the thing that really stands out to offices is like, oh, this person can really contribute like this aspect or these couple of aspects. They're like actually like far ahead of the curve. And in general, that has been an impressive thing. I think the latest generations to come out of school have been really impressive with their communication skills. And I think they have a kind of savviness and maturity, actually, to be honest, that I don't think my generation really did yet at that point. And I think that those are all like valuable things to put on display.
That's great. That's great. Andre, let me pass it over to you.
Yes, so again, just kind of piggybacking on some of the previous comments. I think that Instagram is really a pretty powerful tool right now, especially given the fact that we're all kind of stuck at home. And traditional networking, traditional like events and lectures have been, are now virtual or just canceled. I think Instagram, and I don't know, like, I'm not on Snapchat or TikTok, like maybe that's what everyone is doing now. But I think people of my generation, you can still find on Instagram. And I think for like a smaller firm, surprisingly, it's actually the owner or owners there posting and like responding to, what do you call them? Private messages, I think, and that type of stuff. Like, it's actually a way to find an architect thinking about architecture when they're not sitting at their desk. It might be free time on a weekend or something, and you might be able to just comment on their photo and like begin to build a relationship. And I'm not saying it's going to turn into a job, but I think it's a nice way to just become more comfortable reaching out to some of these people and figuring out who's behind the profile. And in terms of your own presence, like, no one wants to see your vacation photos, and I think it's fine to have a personal account like that, but maybe you also want to have a second account that says something about architecture or about something that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be architecture. Maybe it's the environment or social justice or animal welfare. Like, it kind of doesn't matter, just like having maybe a second account that you can begin to take a position in, or using your own account. I don't know, like, if that's what you want to do, that's fine too, but just like something more than party photos, you know what I mean, or whatever it is, pretty mountains that you photograph, I think is a great way to begin to contribute to the dialogue about architecture and give people a reason to reach or to give something for people to respond to on that particular platform. Let's see what else. Like in terms of just reaching out the old-fashioned way, emailing, calling, however it is that you're sending portfolios out or even just beginning to network, I think, and maybe Chris kind of touched on this, but don't worry if you don't get a response. Like I think you've already kind of won just by sending it out. Like I'm just overwhelmed. I can't respond to every email that comes through my inbox. It's just not possible. I don't have a personal assistant, but I do see the vast majority of them. And when someone sends me a portfolio, I do look at it. I just can't spend 15 minutes telling them how beautiful it is, you know, or what I liked about it. I just don't have that time. So remember that like you are still getting through to people and it does matter. And you might find someone who does, and sooner or later you're going to find someone who it does click for. And so kind of like don't get down on yourself if you're not getting responses, like you're already doing the right thing. And similarly, like, and especially in a hard economy like this, yes, the network is just crucial. Like you have to continue to build it, meaning like your friends, your colleagues, if you have them, your professors, like you have to think long game, like Chris was saying, like these are relationships that need to be nurtured over many, many years. You don't know which one is going to help you in what way. Some of them won't help you at all. It doesn't matter. At least you like know these people and have like a couple more friends. And so, but where I want to go with that is that like, it's not enough to just have a network. Like, don't forget the importance of the portfolio. And Josh was kind of touching on this earlier too. Like getting your foot, you know, getting a personal contact at a firm is not enough. You know, or, you know, getting a professor to respond to your email is not enough. Like, then you have to sell them on yourself. And so then like the old-fashioned portfolio is incredibly important. Like you open the door, but then you have to seal the deal with your portfolio, with your resume, with, you know, your ability to come across as like a likable team player who works hard. You know, like there's gonna be an interview. You have to do well in that interview. And the portfolio is perhaps in architecture, I think, the most important thing. We do look for candidates for employment and internships the old-fashioned way. Like I will post a job. First, I usually post jobs at the Ivies. So Cornell, Harvard, Yale, where else? You know, Princeton. And the reason I do that is because the applicants are just so strong. Like it makes my day easier getting applicants, and many of them either are Americans or have work visas. It's just like an easier way to begin the process. So that's a really real opportunity. Someone is looking to hire, you know, a recent grad, like you should respond to those postings. And then like often what I'll do is open it up to ArcConnect like a week later. And then the floodgates open. and so when you post it with Ivy Leagues, you know, I'm a small, relatively unknown firm. So like, I don't know. Yeah, I might get dozens of applicants. When you open it up to ArcConnect, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of applicants that you're up against. A lot of them you'll be better than, you know, a lot of them quickly just get kind of put in the no chance folder, you know, but still you're up against an incredible amount of applicants. And I'm a small firm, like imagine, you know, like a Star Architect if they, they put it up, like, and so what's happening is that a small firm might be the owner, but a larger firm is going to be someone in charge of hiring, is really just giving you a few seconds. They take your PDF, they fly through it, click through it, you know, and you have those few seconds to grab their attention. And so again, the portfolio is really important, and hopefully you can make it strong. And I think you should kind of think about continuing to add to it. You know, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, and I think competitions are really terrible for a profession, but it is a way to keep the sword sharp and to continue to add things to your portfolio when you're looking for a job. Or maybe you want to do even better than a competition is self-initiated work. So you just have an idea, like, I'm going to put a cabin here in the woods or whatever, here, you know, in the middle of the city, and it's going to be important for certain reasons. Like, I can use this to sell myself to a potential employer or even to find a client, like that type of stuff. I think if you don't just kind of draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I've graduated, I have my portfolio, it's finished, it's done. When am I going to get my job? You know, like, I think there's ways to continue to build it and make it more strong over the months after you graduate.
Yeah, yeah. Great points, especially the idea of making your own work and doing some things that really inspire you, things that you're passionate about. I think that's always a great way to get some conversations going. I think we have time for one more question I want to throw out to the group, and that really deals with kind of the world in the idea of the professional organizations or even some of the civic or cultural groups that you might really feel passionate about. And I know some folks have really spent a lot of time with groups like the Architectural League of New York, or working for the Design Trust, or doing work with the Van Allen. You know, a number of these organizations are really focused on the public realm and thinking about how to create a more just and equitable city. But I'm also really curious about some of the professional connections of whether or not you kind of jumped into the AIA world to get licensing and wanted to follow that road to have that credential, or if there are other things that might have influenced you, because I think going into the organizational realm of thinking about how you can start to work with like-minded people that want to collaborate on really important things, I think it does a lot for your understanding of the profession and what its powers are and what it can be focused on, but also the idea of starting to really build a broader network, well beyond Cornell, of other people that can be really influential in your career. So Imani, let me pass it over to you.
Yeah, I guess I'd say both AIA and NOMA for me came completely after school. I wasn't really active while in school, and that's not to discourage it. It just, in terms of my professional growth, I think the competitions and stuff while in school and the camaraderie that you build is important. But after school, I was actually thinking about moving to Detroit, and then I went to a NOMA conference in Philly. From New York. And so I went to that conference and just figured out that group, number one, just understands me as an architect and designer of color. And that in a lot of cases, I'm going to be the only one in the room for a lot of the jobs that I've had. I'm the only one in the firm. And so having that built in kind of like understanding and just the ability to talk to those people, and they're all levels of leadership and like their peers. So having access to that group, I think, is important. And as I've gotten more involved in NOMA, now I'm the national membership chair, we're trying to build in even more value, even more formal value that says, we know now that this is a time in our, in our profession's history where recruiting of diverse talent is going to be really important. And by diverse talent, I don't mean only Black people. I mean, like, all people of color, all designers of all shades and walks of life. So we're trying to build, and you should look out for, this is a shameless plug, but it's really for you because it's to help you get a job. We're building a new jobs platform, and it's more of an initiative to connect clients to architects of color or architects in general. Young professionals and professionals of all ages to jobs, because we know, for instance, larger firms, smaller firms are going to be looking for that talent. And if NOMA's not ready to give that information or data, it's going to be a tough, less efficient process. And doesn't make sense for us to not get ready for that and gear up for that. So I'd say getting involved in NOMA, not only does it get you a job informally, because you can say, hey, I know these people, you guys work at X, help me out here. Or you can reach out and say, like across the country, you can reach out and it's more likely that a NOMA person will respond to you. So that has been super helpful to me. I still take, like daily now, I talk to NOMA people, and even through licensure, it helps a lot because I had a support group who helped me day to day just study for that stuff and keep me accountable. So there's a lot of built-in resources in NOMA, and I'd say go to the conference this year, because even if it's virtual, you can still chat with people. They can see your face and say, I know that person, so if there's a cold call or something. And this is, I mean, it's not, there are super large firms, there are small minority women-owned businesses, there's so many things, there's so many scales within NOMA that I'd encourage you to just pay attention to some of the seminars. And so the last thing I'll say is that AIA, I'm involved locally in AIA mainly because I think AIA's reach is really important. So if I'm in NOMA locally, we have about 30 members in Detroit, and in New York, it's very different from state to state. With AIA, there are thousands and thousands of members. All of the professional, like all of the firms are connected to AIA in each city, I'd say, like almost, they have so much more reach that if there is, you know, looking toward a more equitable practice, finding resources and training and mentor and those sorts of things, AIA can really spread that. But without Gensler paying for my membership, I shamelessly, I would not, I don't know if I'd be a member. If firms weren't paying for my membership, I don't know exactly how I would interact with AIA. So I'd lean toward NOMA, or like ULI, for instance, is a really good place, one, to find work, because there's lawyers and finance people in ULI, you can find work, and then build your network in a different way. But I'd lean towards ULI or NOMA in terms of building your professional networks right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that point about the Urban Land Institute, they're well beyond just North America. You know, they have a huge reach in Asia as well as in Europe. So they're very, very strong as it relates to helping to build those long-term relationships. So Imani, thank you. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, so for me, one of the things that I've been trying to do over the past few years is maintain a connection to academic research through conferences. So it's not, you know, quite the same thing as a professional association like AIA or something. But for me, Acadia is one conference that I've been to a few times, and that generates a lot of good connections, and it's the kind of thing that I can go to and enjoy for itself and not have to sort of worry about like, oh, I'm here to network and I'm here to make connections. I can just go and enjoy the content because it's really interesting to me, and accidentally make connections at the same time, especially if you go to, you know, the same sort of event year after year and you start seeing the same faces. You don't necessarily meet someone in the first year, but the next year, like, oh, I remember that talk you gave, and you can sort of more slowly develop those connections. And another thing is, going back to what Andre said, is I found it's a good way to give me something to do that's not directly related. You know, rather than doing a competition, I'm looking for research opportunities where I can develop something that I can write a paper to submit to Acadia. And whether or not it gets accepted by Acadia is sort of beside the point. The point is for me to do it and write the paper so that I have that, you know, in my back pocket, or I learn something from it, or it keeps me sharp. And so that's another sort of tool that I have been using, similar to the competition idea, but with a slightly different, more academic, more theoretical bent. So you know, there's lots of groups all over the place that are sort of focused on a specific topic. So in New York City, there's a digital design community that talks about computational design. They meet every 3 months or so, and they have guest speakers, and it's a sort of a free event that you can go and attend. And it's sort of the same thing that you don't have to go and talk to everybody the first time. You go to the first event, you see what's up, you enjoy it. You go to the second event, you say hi, and you can sort of develop that community over time. And you'll find that these communities are really, I think as Bob mentioned, it's a surprisingly small and connected community. And you'll find that, you know, the person you saw at this one event, 6 months later, you're at a different event, you see them again. And over time, you develop relationships and develop connections.
Yeah, that's great. Great points, Chris. Thank you. Josh?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, on the one hand, strategy matters quite a bit in terms of how you approach things and building connections, but also remaining like open to opportunities wherever they lie and present themselves, and being okay with like kind of expanding into things that you may not have been expecting. After grad school, actually, it was 2008 for me. It was the Great Recession. The job market was just horrendous. Like, never mind trying to work for like your dream office. It was just like, can you get something? And at the time, I was fortunate enough to be approached by a friend who was working with the Brooklyn Community Services, a group that needed a temporary installation for something, and we like collaborated on this quick thing, and it was like this art installation. I'd never done anything like that, and it was just like wonderful working with this community service organization and getting to know them and involving them in the process. And then later targeting things when years down the road, when I was working with Nancy and we had our own shop, things that were local, trying to find opportunities and competitions that are local, things that will have kind of impacts on the kind of immediate environment around you. So definitely the Arc League New York was really a useful organization to be involved with. You know, we entered competitions for that. We didn't win the first one we entered, but it's important to just identify like what was positive about those experiences, what worked well, what made sense, what didn't, self-edit, and then, you know, followed it up, entered again, and lucky enough to have won the second round of it. And then before you know it, you're like involved with something that is bigger than you, and you're you know, you're getting hands dirty, you're building things, you're getting kind of whatever kind of work you can get done, you're getting done, and the community is making use of it. In our case, it was doing a project at Socrates Sculpture Park. And to touch back on like some previous points as well, you know, the self-initiated work, the kind of the work that, you know, may never see like a building result out of it, I think is, you know, it may not bring in a paycheck right away, that's for sure, but you can't underestimate the value that it brings to have like, you know, this really focused project that you develop, and the different branches and forks that could lead for you is difficult to understand before you really undergo that process, but it is so rich in terms of where it can take you in a lot of different avenues.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, so true. Those projects, you never know where they're going to go, and they do tend to pop up later on. And certainly I've seen a lot of that work get done in someone's office that takes years to manifest before the right client or the right opportunity comes up. So I think those are all really important. I won't labor it, but I've definitely been to enough offices when I've seen projects and they say, oh yeah, we developed that 15, 20 years ago and we're now building it. So keeping the long view sometimes, as painful as that might seem in this conversation, there are remarkable projects that take years to finally manifest. So important to keep that in mind. Andre, I'm going to give you kind of the last thoughts on this, and then we'll bring it to a close, but go ahead.
Yeah, let's see. I've always had a strong interest in sustainability and the climate change, I guess you would call it. And so I've used New York Passive House. They have an organization as just a way of meeting people and seeing like work that interests me, because you get to go visit houses that are open, under construction or recently finished. And you know, I think if you know what you're into, it can be really fun to meet like-minded people. It's so easy to strike up a conversation when you're passionate about the same things. Urban Green in New York is also a good organization. They have a lot of evening lectures and that type of stuff. Once you're licensed, you end up spending a ton of time trying to get continuing education credits. And every 3 years in New York, at least, you need like 36 hours, and like it's amazing how quickly those 3 years pass. So that actually ends up motivating me to find, you know, lectures and educational activities, and so somehow that ends up pushing me in directions that I wouldn't expect, just because I need to fulfill the requirement.
Yeah.
You know, the AIA in New York is really strong. I think they do a great job with lectures and events and exhibits. I've plugged into a land bank in the Hudson Valley that's doing really great work for a city, the city of Newburgh. So that's a nonprofit, and actually I've been involved with a couple different nonprofit organizations over the last few years, and I think it's really nice. They tend to just be doing really good work and have people that are very passionate about what they're doing, and so I definitely recommend finding them. And again, like, I think a lot of us are pretty, even if we've moved on since we got our start in New York City, and I think that is affecting our advice. But I do think that you can find a lot of these smaller organizations, like this land bank, for example, well outside of New York City, that are just as valuable, and you'll meet people that are just as like passionate and interesting. Like, so don't give up hope if you're not in New York City.
Yeah,
there's so much out there all over.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think there's also, given the COVID-19 issue and the fact that we're all at home, you know, I'm seeing so many more events being posted that I wouldn't have been able to even tap into. But now, if you can find the time, or if you want to pick up, most of them are recorded, so you can take a look at them at your own time. I think there's so much more online that I've never seen as many conferences, and really things that would have cost a lot of money and a lot of time to invest to go to a certain city to a conference that are now being done virtually, that I think, despite the lack of, say, job opportunities, there is a great opportunity to actually invest in your knowledge and your ongoing curiosities, to look in areas that wouldn't have been very accessible up until now. But at this point, we can actually tap into a lot more data. I'm seeing like listings that are now coming up every day of new things that I'm like, I would like to actually take the time to do it. So for those students out there, or recent graduates, it's actually almost everything I've ever seen is free, or like nominal, like $5 or $10. So I think it's still within your reach. So please keep that in mind. And also, I know, Marjorie, you've got some slides that I guess we'll post up a little later, or do you want to show them now? Because I'm going to let everyone kind of wrap up, but if the students want to stay on, we do have some information to share with you about some of the other organizations that might be of value. And of course, I want to thank all of our guests. This has been really wonderful. An hour is never enough, and I know we're over, but I want to personally thank each of you for joining us today. This has been really a treat to reconnect with some of you who I haven't had a chance to see in a while. So, you know, thank you on behalf of Dean Mi Jin-yoon and the rest of the leadership at Cornell. We're really, really appreciative of your taking the time today to join us.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, great speaking with you guys.
Marjorie, I'll let you have the last word, as they say. You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope I just shared the screen, so I hope that the students can see the list of the professional associations, and I'll go through this. And I'll also provide the students with the PDF of the slides as well. So if they can't write everything down, it's available to them. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is great.